Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down the threat of a severe weather outbreak tomorrow across portions of the United States. This will bring the risk for significant damaging winds, large to very large hail, and perhaps a few tornadoes. We'll also be breaking down the intensifying heat wave that'll be impacting the entire country over the next few days. I'll give you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today. We'll first begin with the Central Plains, and this is where we have a high pressure system located in the upper levels. That is our heat dome, and this is going to be spreading across a large chunk of the United States over the next few days because the jet stream will be lifting up here to the north, which is going to allow for a ton of heat to really filter into areas like the Midwest, the Northeast, the East Coast, really again across the entire United States. We'll be watching for a heat dome that is going to be impacting a lot of areas, bringing heat indices as high as 115 to areas like the Midwest. So again, very hot weather will be coming out of that here over the next couple days. But the one thing that we need to watch for very closely in terms of a significant severe weather threat is going to be associated with the storm activity that is back up in the northern plains and in southern Canada. This will eventually move to the east over the next few days towards areas like the Midwest and the Ohio Valley, and this will bring the risk for severe weather tomorrow across these areas. And eventually going into Thursday, we'll be watching for more severe weather to spread across areas in the Northeast. So this will be a dual threat, bringing all modes of severe weather, and we're going to talk about a lot more specific details on this in just a moment. But let's talk more about the jet stream in the United States, because the jet stream is what is controlling the weather pattern here across the entire country. And what we have right now is a very interesting setup. It's kind of a bit more typical for the summer, but one thing that's not nearly as typical is having this heat dome just sit across the central and southern plains for weeks on end. This thing has been here for almost a month now, and it has not moved really at all. It's been sitting in the southwest United States and in the southern plains. It has really shifted a little bit east and west, but it's not moving a whole lot, and it's really unfortunate because it's bringing that massive heat wave. Now, as of right now, the jet stream is located across really parts of the northwest United States, and it's a meridional jet stream as of right now, but this will change over the next couple of days. By Wednesday and Thursday, notice where the jet stream's located. It's going to be where those pink and purple colors are. That is where the strongest upper level winds are, and that is where our jet stream's located, with a trough that is going to be a bit weaker in the upper levels but stronger at the surface back up into parts of southern Canada. That'll provide that risk for a little bit of severe weather. And then back over in parts of southeast Canada, that is where we have another trough that's nowhere near the United States. But notice the heat dome is dominating a large chunk of the United States, and this is what's going to be increasing the heat wave across areas like the Ohio Valley, the Midwest, and even perhaps parts of the Northeast as we get closer to the weekend. But once we get closer to Saturday into Sunday, notice this jet stream will start to dip again. We're going to start to go back to a meridional jet stream, which will be in a zonal jet stream for a little while, which is more of a flat jet stream. This will be more of a curvature jet stream, which is the meridional jet stream. And then we'll be watching for a trough that'll start to dip out of Canada. This will bring a cool down to areas in the Northeast. Temperatures will drop into the 80s, maybe even some 70s for high temperatures. Once we get into Monday into Tuesday, notice that dip in the jet stream back over the Northeast. Unfortunately, though, the heat dome is really not going to do us any favors for the remainder of the United States. It'll stay very hot across much of the country, including the Midwest, Southeast, Southern Plains, and really across almost the entire Great Plains. And then once we get into Wednesday and Thursday of next week, things become much more uncertain, but this jet stream may start to dip a bit more. But again, things do become a lot more uncertain past really anywhere past this weekend, but we'll keep you posted with any new details there. Let's talk a bit more about the temperature anomalies in the United States, which what this basically means is when we see darker red colors, that's going to be indicating well above average temperatures from the actual average temperature in your region, and then below average temperatures for the blues. And you'll notice over the next few days, this heat wave will really intensify, especially across areas in the Ohio Valley, central and northern plains, and as well as the Midwest. That is where it'll begin to get very hot because of this heat dome moving further to the east. Once we get into Friday into Saturday, that heat continues, but it will move a bit further down to the south and southeast. That will be pending if this jet stream does dip, which it is likely to, across the Northeast. And if that happens, parts of the Midwest and the Northeast will begin a little bit cooler once we go through the weekend and into next week. Cooler weather will continue across the Northeast United States. Meanwhile, warmer weather for a large chunk of the Great Plains and as well as near the Gulf Coast down into the Southeast. So unfortunately, this heat really isn't going anywhere. The Climate Prediction Center is totally on board with this for the first week of August. Above average temperatures are expected across the Gulf Coast, especially there. We'll be talking about potentially near record-breaking temperatures in some areas. And back in the Northeast United States, that's where below average temperatures will be happening back up that direction. So some good news if you're back in the Northeast and the Midwest. Now let's talk more about the severe weather potential for the next few days, and we'll begin with today, which is very important to what we will see tomorrow. It's pretty much a precursor in terms of what we might see in terms of a severe weather outbreak across parts of the Midwest and the Ohio Valley. The Storm Prediction Center currently does have a slight risk of severe weather. It does include much of the northern plains and even back into Nebraska. Main concerns, though, for today are damaging winds and maybe a little bit of large hail. I wouldn't rule out a brief tornado, but the risk of that is very low today. Here's what it looks like on the timing guide. So going through this afternoon around 4 o'clock, storms will start to fire up. Any of these that do become discrete will produce that best chance for large to very large hail and, again, downburst damaging winds. By around 6 to 7 o'clock, those storms move off to the east, and eventually going into the late evening into the overnight hours, that complex of storms will continue to march to the east, which is entirely a precursor to what we will see tomorrow, because there is a threat for a severe weather outbreak across parts of the Midwest and as well as back through the Ohio Valley, including primarily Michigan, northern Ohio, and northern Indiana. That is our best chance for significant severe weather. In terms of damaging winds, large hail, and perhaps a few tornadoes are not out of the question, but again, a lot of this has to do with what happens today. So there is a chance that we see a strong tornado. There is also a chance that we see a few tornadoes, but a lot of that is going to depend on what we see in terms of action today and how it evolves as it moves off to the east, because we're likely going to be seeing a mesoscale convective vortex. It's similar to what we saw over in the Chicago suburbs a couple weeks ago, where we saw multiple tornadoes and that PDS tornado that occurred west of Chicago. That's similar to what we could see tomorrow, but I think we'll be on the lesser side of things. I don't think it'll be nearly as significant as what we saw a couple weeks ago. Now, in terms of the damaging wind threat, as of right now, there is a 30% probability within a 25-mile radius across Michigan, northern Ohio, and northern Indiana. That's our best chance for damaging winds at this time. And the tornado risk, again, is a bit more on the low side, but it could increase. It just depends on what happens today. Again, we'll keep you posted with any new details there, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And we also might go live for this, so make sure you subscribe and click the bell icon down below so you're notified if and when we go live. But as of right now, the main tornado risk is across southern Michigan, northern Ohio, and northern Indiana. There's a chance for a brief tornado closer to Chicago, and I'll show you why in just a second. But first, I want to show you the forecasted low-level jet, which is what shows us the rotation potential in the lower atmosphere. And as of right now, as we go through tomorrow afternoon, the low-level jet will start to crank up, especially across parts of central and eastern Michigan, where you might notice the low-level jet gets as strong as 30 to 40 knots. And the wind profiles throughout the atmosphere do remain pretty uniform and pretty intense, that we could actually see the threat for a couple tornadoes. So that's really the concern for tomorrow. It just depends on how these storms evolve, because we have the low-level jet, we have plenty of shear as well. It's just gonna be a matter of how this sets up entirely. So this is what the HRR model is thinking in terms of this storm setup for tomorrow. As we go through the overnight hours into tomorrow morning, one thing we need to watch for very closely during around 8 to 12 o'clock tomorrow morning is how much storm activity there is. How much convection is there ongoing? Because depending on that answer, if there's a lot of convection, we could be talking a bit more about a more significant severe weather outbreak, which could prompt that 10% tornado risk. But if we're not seeing nearly as much convection, in this case, the HR model is only picking up on a little bit, it would probably be on the lower side of things. Now, as these storms move off to the east going into the late morning, around about 1 o'clock or so in the afternoon, these storms will be crossing over the Great Lakes near eastern and southeast Wisconsin and northeast Illinois, and eventually by around 2 o'clock, storms will be rolling through Michigan. And the main concern out of this would be damaging winds. Now, there is a chance that there could be an increased tornado risk. It really just depends, again, on how organized the mesoscale convective vortex is and how much convection there is. Those are going to be the two biggest questions. But once we go through the afternoon around 4 o'clock, storms move off to the east, mainly as a damaging wind threat across areas in Michigan. And eventually by about 6 o'clock, we'll continue to see those storms move off to the east. Maybe a little bit of storm activity in Ohio, but a lot of that should be pretty isolated in nature, or not really isolated in nature in terms of storm activity, but the severe weather should be a bit more isolated. We'll be still watching for some scattered to numerous storm activity. Now, one other scenario that could happen in terms of more convection would be what we're looking at the NAM3K model. It's indicating a much higher tornado risk because of the fact that the MCV, the mesoscale convective vortex, would be more organized. And if that ends up happening, we'll be watching for an increased risk for a tornado risk. Even back over in parts of the eastern Midwest near Chicago and the Chicago suburbs, we could see a bit more circulation in that MCV. And if that does end up happening, we could see a slightly higher tornado risk. So it's going to be something to watch for closely tomorrow. Once these storms move through Michigan during the late afternoon and into the evening hours, they'll produce more of a damaging wind threat with maybe a couple tornadoes. But overall, I still think, in my personal opinion, the tornado risk will stay a bit more on the lower side of things. But stay tuned. We'll keep you posted if anything does change in this forecast. I just want to throw this out there. Not everybody will see severe weather. In fact, most of us will not see severe weather, at least in terms of the tornado risk. So there's no reason to panic. Just make sure that you're ready and prepared with that tornado action plan in place. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.